Let us begin at the beginning, which is the breath of life itself. The breath that breathes life into all of humanity and is the spark of life for all forms of life. We begin today a new chapter and a new month focusing on the practice of spiritual mind healing, learning about it, applying it. And we begin with a smile. So, joining me in that smile, joining me in that willingness and readiness to dive more deeply into science of mind, we simply bless it, we call it good, and so it is. Amen. All right, let's dive into chapter 19, the summary of part 3, all about the practice of spiritual mind healing. On page 308, if you were following along in the textbook, Ernest Holmes writes a brief summary at the top of this chapter. He writes, in the preceding 18 chapters of this book, the one object in mind has been to uncover man's spiritual nature and his relationship to God and the universe. Therefore, instead of the usual recapitulation of the 6 chapters just concluded, we propose to make this an informal discussion of the general theme of how to give a mental treatment. If you are not familiar with science of mind, then that phrase, how to give a mental treatment, may seem a little unusual to you. I know that for some people who have been exposed to science of mind, the idea of a mental treatment is confusing still. And so this chapter gives us an opportunity to understand what is it that makes a mental treatment work and what's going on when we are speaking or writing a mental treatment. So hang with me if this is your first time hearing about mental treatment. And in the big picture, just think about it as a form of prayer and a form of treating or doing a treatment for a new condition or a new experience or to change conditions. Just like a couple of weeks ago, I had some chest congestion and I used Vicks Vapor Rub as a treatment. I used NyQuil as a treatment to treat physical condition. Then think of mental treatment as a way to align and use the power of the universe and the power of divinity in order to treat a condition in your life. Okay, that's the kind of general overview. Let's see what Ernest Holmes had to say about it. Spirituality is natural goodness. God is not a person. God is a presence personified in us. I'm just going to repeat that. This is a summary of so much of what's been in the first 18 chapters, and I just want you to hear it one more time. Spirituality is natural goodness. God is not a person. God is a presence personified in us. Spirituality is not a thing. It is the atmosphere of God's presence, God's goodness, truth, and beauty. Religion is a life, a living. If we could forget that philosophy is profound, that religion is spiritual, and life serious, all of which may be true, but if we could forget all these things, and approach reality as normally as we go about our daily affairs, we would be better off. If there is one thing we should learn, it is that spiritual treatment must not be confused with mental concentration. A treatment is an active thing. If we are going to treat by a technique, by a method or procedure, if we are going to treat by a mental process, if we are going to reduce spiritual treatment to a mental science, then there is a method, a technique, and a procedure in mental treatment. There is a certain mental attention we should have in giving a treatment. But this is very different from the popular idea of mental concentration, as though we must hold the mind to one thought for a certain period of time. Start with this simple proclamation or proposition. The nature of God, the nature of man, and the nature of being is perfect. Repeating. The nature of God, of man, and of being is perfect, harmonious, whole. Perfect God, perfect man, and perfect being. And in treatment, conform your thought to this idea. Then let the treatment be a moving thing, a series of thoughts or statements followed by realization. I think I'm going to stop right there for this moment, and then we'll pick it up, because there is so much in those 1, 2, 3 paragraphs that is critically important. In that first paragraph, the second sentence, God is not a person, God is a presence personified in us. The third sentence, spirituality is not a thing. It's the atmosphere of God's presence, goodness, truth, and beauty. It's really important and foundational. So if you grew up or if you learned somewhere along your journey that God is like a superhuman being living up in the sky and looking down on the world and judging us, in science of mind, we operate with this idea that God is an infinite intelligence and invisible, always present, right, force that creates all life from itself. So God is not a person. That would be what we refer to as an anthropomorphizing God. It's like, I know that word and it just went out of my head. Anthropomorphizing God, right? Using the anthropology of what we know about humanity and then saying, well, God, that's what God is, but a little bit more. But that's not what God is. So God is not a person, so we don't think of God as him or her or like a super Tracy. God is a presence that gets personified in each one of us in a unique way. So from the first paragraph, that's really, really important for us to understand and remember. And remember that spirituality is the goodness, it's the atmosphere that is created from the goodness, the beauty, and the truth of God. In the second paragraph, what really, really jumps out, at least for me, is that we must not confuse spiritual treatment with mental concentration. Like the idea that if we just mentally concentrate on something and hold it in our minds for 3 hours without interruption, we are making something happen. He says in this paragraph and reminds us that absolutely we are using our minds. He writes, there is a certain mental attention we should have in giving a treatment. But that's different from the concept of mental concentration or mind controlling matter. Our mental concentration is used to focus our energy and focus our thoughts, but we never get confused and think we are the ones actually making the change in matter. That would be spiritual and physical law, and we are simply using or directing the focus of the law, of the way that things happen. But we ourselves, our mental concentration is not the power that is actually making the change. And then in the third paragraph, near the top of page 309, start with this simple proposition: the nature of God, of man, and of being is perfect, harmonious, and whole. The base, the foundation of understanding how spiritual mind treatment works is understanding perfect God, perfect man, perfect being. The perfection of God's spirit, the universe, whatever language resonates with you that explains or describes or captures the wholeness of God, that's perfect. And humanity, in the experience of being the form of man or humanity, that there is a perfection in that, and it is harmonious. They are not competing with one another. The divinity and the spirituality are working together. And then perfect being is the experience of our lives, right? There's God, there's man, and there's the experience of our lives. We are being perfection in how we explore and evolve our lives. So this one paragraph, or these three paragraphs, I'm not surprised that Ernest Holmes laid out what is spiritual mind healing with that beginning. Now I'm going to read a couple more paragraphs, but I want you to be thinking about these three ideas. God is not a person. God is a presence personified in each of us. How do you know that to be true in your life? Or what do you think about that helps that to make sense for you? Also be thinking about this idea of the difference between paying mental attention and believing that mental concentration is the actual power, right? What's the difference for you between mental attention and mental concentration? And then third, the phrase, perfect God, perfect man, perfect being. Because I'm pretty sure we're going to go back to that. So be thinking of those three things as I add two more paragraphs, and then we'll open it up for your comments and questions. Gradually, a conviction dawns that God is all there is. And as this conviction grows, the work is done more easily and with a greater degree of acceptance. A growing spiritual atmosphere comes into it. When this truth takes hold of our consciousness and we contact what appears to be imperfect man, imperfect God, and imperfect being, we shall better know that the manifestation of imperfection has no right to exist. In actual practice, this becomes a series of statements, arguments perhaps, but a series of statements which finally culminate in the mental evidence being in favor of perfect God, perfect man, and perfect being. The way to learn how to treat is to treat. At first, one has the feeling in treating of wondering if anything is really happening, until she finally realizes that this apparent nothingness from which she deals is the only ultimate something out of which tangible things could be made. So, let's dive in. Perfect man, perfect God, perfect man, perfect being, mental attention versus mental concentration, and God is not a person. God is a presence personified in us. So, I know you've got something to say. I can hardly wait to hear it, but we may have somebody who's with us for the first time or the second time. So I'm going to ask Ryan to give you some reminders about how you can participate.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy, and welcome to everybody who is joining us here on Zoom and also our Facebook Live. And I just want to acknowledge that we have a miraculous practitioner room being built below us this morning. So if you heard a few knocks and pings, just be conscious that we're going to be experiencing that.
We're in a construction zone.
Yes. So yes, and we're also inviting you to come here on September 5th so you can see all the wonderful new things that we have here at CSLDallas. So this is a great blessing and opportunity. So we want to hear from you. This is an interactive discussion. This isn't one of those things where you just sit there and watch us. We want to hear from you. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. If you're here with us inside of the Zoom room, you can go ahead and hit the raise your hand icon and I'll call you into the room. Or you can always feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat and I can bring those into the room as well. And for those who are watching us on Facebook Live, we want to hear from you as well. So feel free to put your questions and comments inside of the chat, and I'll bring those into the room too. And as always, I want to make sure that everybody knows that this is a safe container that we can all speak with. So that's why I keep names anonymous. But I do occasionally shout out people if I see them out there. You know. All right. And I just want to acknowledge we do have a couple of people who are really happy that we are having the construction happening here as well too. So that's yes. Great. One of the questions to kind of kick us off as we're waiting for people to raise their hand here in the Zoom room is, how does God both have an individual personality yet we are all made of it? Or does it?
I love that. So God does not have an individual personality. So that's an easy thing to respond to. God is the wholeness, the allness, the totality. It individualizes itself in each one of us. And so each one of us is what we refer to more often as a personalized expression. So the idea of personality is really a psychology term more than a spiritual term. And we, in our conversations and in our languaging, we use personality to represent the individual quirks and eccentricities and preferences of an individual. When we say that God is personalized as and through each one of us, what we're saying is that every one of us is made from the same qualities, or the qualities that are God, the wholeness of life itself. And they are combined or integrated in different ways that makes each one of us different, and also creates collective identity groups of people. So there's no mistake that there are people who look different, or different racial groups, different racial or ethnic identities, different climates in the world that reflect or require different needs, different social patterns. by group, and then even within every group, right? Every individual is unique. So the language that's used here in this first paragraph of chapter 19, you will hear throughout Science of Mind, that God is not a person. God is a presence personified in us, or each one of us is a personification of an aspect or a combination of aspects of God itself. Great, great question, but God does not have a personality. What else you got?
It seems like we have some shy people here today, Tracy. We would really love to hear from you out here on the Zoom room. So go ahead and hit the raise your hand icon.
And yeah, if you have an example of how you learned about or began to understand this idea that God is not a person, and the difference between person and personification and personality, or the perfect God, perfect man, perfect being, sometimes that's really confusing for people. And if you don't have questions, I'll just keep going, because this is such a rich chapter as we start getting into the practice itself of spiritual mind healing.
Yes, yes. And so now that you said that, we have some interaction here. So I've got a person with their hand raised. Ella Shiva, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself? Ella Shiva.
Good morning, Dr. Tracy Brown. A question about a conviction dawns that God is all there is. I've been working with Science of Mind for a little while now, and really trying to get a feeling of the presence of God, the mental atmosphere of God. Is there anything that you could suggest to help with this conviction? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you and good morning. Welcome. So there are, the basic go-to is we, in our human state and in the 21st century, we tend to want instant gratification and instant results, and we've been groomed in our physical human experience to expect that. And clearly, what we know is that what you're talking about, the conviction and the feeling, I love that you used the word, the feeling of it is grown over time, unless we have some major emergency or major significant emotional experience that tips us into, deep or full and abiding faith and practice. So for most of us, the way that we grow and groom that feeling where we just know, not we're telling ourselves that about God or having, like, we know it. It's just practice. And it's not one specific practice. It's finding the spiritual practices that help you to deepen, each one of us finding our own pattern. And so is that prayer? Is that meditation? Is that a lot of people who are serious runners, right? They make their connection with the infinite nature of God through running. And like being out of their body, like being in that runner's high and recognizing I feel one with nature. I feel one with all of life. So I would suggest that you and me and everyone else simply really understand that the discipline of doing daily spiritual practice, it's not an exercise. It's not just a mental exercise. We are shifting the cells in our body, the molecules in our body, and the way our brain thinks to be convicted to this idea that God is a presence that is me, that is operating as me, that God, Spirit and I are one. So I love your question, and I would say just keep working, keep doing the work. That doesn't mean efforting, but just be consistent. And you will find, even as Ernest Holmes writes in the paragraph that I just read, at first one has the feeling of wondering if anything is really happening. But there'll be a day where you realize that this apparent nothingness is really the only thing that something is made from. Ryan.
Yeah, and I want to add, I see that we have one of the observations about what we've been talking about before we dive further into the paragraphs here. The observation says, the difference between mental awareness and mental concentration or compulsion is one of surrender or acceptance. We are inviting a good that is always available to us.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. And it really is that difference between accepting and living in that versus believing we're making it happen.
Yeah, and it looks like we do have one person here, Anita, and I'm going to call into the room before we move further into this chapter. So Anita, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself and join us?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. And thanks. Good morning, Dr. Tracy Brown.
Good morning.
Just want to add on to that comment about deepening conviction, right? And yeah, you can have an experience in life where all of a sudden you just know that you know. But on a regular basis, when you're doing your prayer work or your spiritual practices and you're setting intentions of things that you want to see changed in your life or things that you want to bring into your life that experience that, you build up your faith in going, here's what I want. Now watch and see how the universe brings that to be.
Yes.
And when you get to the point where even little things repeatedly over and over and over again manifest in your life where you're seeing them, that helps you grow that conviction, because that's when you actually make the connection that, wow, this stuff really works. You know, this is what I asked for, and look, it's here. And as you said, Tracy, it's you know, it takes years sometimes to develop that conviction. But, you know, when you get to the point where you can watch the serendipities happen, then you get to a point where you just don't even doubt that when you release your word into the law, you know it's going to come back to you manifested.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Anita. I love the way that you expanded on that and made it so real, because as I'm listening to you, it's like that's exactly right. So it may have been at one point intellectually, I did believe, and maybe I wasn't at the point of full conviction, or I definitely wasn't at the point of full faith. And one of the ways that I knew I had deepened my faith, because I think, you know, I can always continue to evolve faith in a positive direction. But I remember there was a day where something didn't happen, or, you know, there was something I had been praying about, and it seemed like it was taking forever and ever. And I remember that day going, well, it's just not here yet. It's not here, it's never going to happen, it's not going to come through, you know, nothing ever works out for me. All the places that our brain wants to go, our humanity wants to go, because we don't have the proof. But I remember the day that I shocked myself when I heard my thoughts go to, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. Of course it's going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet. Like, delay is not denial. And really believed it. Like I was telling myself. I didn't need, anybody else to tell me. That kind of belief, that kind of faith, for most of us, most of the time, is built from daily, weekly, monthly, year after year practice. So that the question about how do I get the feeling of conviction, you can't fake the feeling. You can fake the belief by what you say, and you can sound really smart, and you can quote Ernest Holmes or the Bible or the Quran, or right, you can quote the scriptures and the spiritual guidebooks, and you will sound really smart, and you will be giving knowledge or information. But the feeling, the true feeling, you can't fake. And when you have, the deeper your conviction, the more you will feel it when you do a treatment or say a prayer. And you will have what we often refer to as the fire of conviction, the feeling of it. Do we have anything else, Ryan?
Yeah, we do. I just want to bring Connie into the room. Connie, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Good morning, Dr. Tracy. Hi.
Hi, Connie.
This reminds me of the difference between theory and practice that I bumped into when I was studying cultural anthropology.
Yes.
I knew all about culture shock. It was in the book, and I knew all about it. But I didn't have any kind of a deep feeling about it until I experienced it. And when I went to China, one of my students invited me to go and stay with her family for a whole month in Wenzhou, China. I experienced culture shock directly. It was like pow, right in my face. I was safe, I was happy, but it was culture shock because things were so different, and I felt it. So it kind of reminds me of that.
Thank you. That is, so, but, so much of what's important to me about science of mind, beside practicing or in addition to applying it in my own life, is helping people apply it in their lives, their circumstances, with the people they meet and the situations they find themselves in. And Connie, that is the perfect language to use, because the theory or the philosophy of science of mind, okay, you can learn it and you can repeat it, but the application of it, the practice of it, requires us to pay attention, requires us to notice, and requires us to integrate it into how we show up, what we say and what we do. So definitely what we're talking about is the distinction between theory and practice. I love it. I appreciate it. Thank you. So let's go see if we, in the time we have, let's see if we can add one or two more paragraphs. So we're at the bottom of page 309 in the chapter about the practice of spiritual mind healing. And Ernest Holmes writes this: recent research in the field of physics has revealed that the metaphysical abstraction is the thing that physics begins with, energy and intelligence. We would add to this that intelligence may be directed by consciousness. In mental and spiritual treatment, the practitioner endeavors to enter into the consciousness of a state of unity of all life, in which unity exists past, present, and future. The person for whom he is working and the unborn but potential possibility of the condition for which he works. She is dealing not with mental suggestion, but with a spiritual presence. She does not seek to force an issue, but rather permits a creative intelligence to perform a certain act. We are all familiar with the idea of unity in this physical world, this physical universe. All physical form is made of one ultimate stuff, of which no one knows the nature. We are acquainted with the form. As stated above, physics has chased this form, as it were, back into a primordial unity of energy and intelligence. Perhaps this is what Emerson had in mind when he said that every fact is fluid, or what Spinoza had in mind when he said, I do not say that mind is one thing and matter another. I say they are the same thing. All forms are theoretically resolvable into a universal energy and substance upon which and through which intelligence operates. The Bible says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were made by the Word. And without the Word was not anything made that was made. The Bible clearly speaks of the physical universe and everything in it as though it were a word in form, that God is spirit, that the action of spirit upon itself produces creation, that man is a complement of the universe, an incarnation of the universe, partaking of the same nature. Consequently, his word is creative. This should answer the question of the students who are unable to understand how thought can become a thing, how thought can influence objective life, whether it be the physical body or the physical environment. All right, just take a deep breath. Take a deep, deep breath, because I know some of you are like, whoa, what did Ernest Holmes just write? I remember reading this paragraph, this chapter, the first or second time I read it, and I just got lost in all the language, lost in all the words. But Ernest Holmes does a really good thing here in explaining how through all philosophies, it all comes back to, even through physics, quantum physics, it all comes back to the source of all of creation, the source of all life, the source of all form is from an energy and intelligence that's really invisible, but somehow it creates form. It creates humanity, humans, it creates fish, it creates the ocean, it creates mountains. And for many people, when Ernest Holmes goes back to the Bible and the creation story, and he refers to, in the beginning was God, and in the beginning there was Word, and the use of word, the power of speaking the word, allows or directs, is the word I prefer, directs the nature of the universe to form in certain ways, to move in certain directions. And when we are talking about doing a spiritual treatment or a mind treatment, what we are talking about is using the word to direct the infinite energy and intelligence of the universe. That's what this chapter is about. And we have about 5 minutes. If you have a burning question, this is your last chance to get it in. Or if you have an example of how this makes sense to you or how it works in your mind, now is your last chance to raise your hand or put a comment in the chat, whether you're in Zoom or whether you're on Facebook Live. I'd love to hear your comment. Ryan, what do you see?
Well, it looks like we have some excited people because I saw a hand go up and then it went quickly down. All right, now it's kind of going back up. Okay. So I'm going to ask Carl if he does want to speak. Carl, would you like to go ahead and talk? You can unmute yourself if you do.
Great, yeah, good. Thank you, Tracy, I just love I love these classes that we're doing. It's so profound. But one of the reasons I got on was I'm under the weather this morning, under the weather with some allergy and cold and so on. And I noticed that when I'm listening to this, there's a how should I say it? A deeper listening. It's almost like Spirit wants me to get well. You know, it's, hey, and there's an opportunity here of listening deeper. It's almost like I'm hearing. Anyway, I just want to know if you might say something about that when you're in the process of doing a spiritual mind treatment and wanting to get well, so.
I love that. Thanks, Carl. And first and foremost, I mean, I am breathing into that connection, right? That we are infinitely connected, and so that improvement, that realignment of your physical and mental and emotional priorities is happening right here and right now. I know this. As I listened to you, what you reminded me of was that sometimes we forget that there is an eye behind the physical eye. There is an ear behind the physical ear. Like we are when we are in spiritual mind treatment, we are utilizing the eye behind the eye, the ear behind the ear, the deeper knowing of the truth of our soul, and that is more powerful than the experience of our physical human body that we can see and touch. And that feeling sick or experiencing sickness, it is not imaginary. Our physical body is making some transformation, some adaptation, some correction. But it is the wisdom of our soul, that deeper knowing that every cell in our body has been created with everything it needs to have to know what it needs to do to work together with every other cell in order to create and reveal the wholeness that is Carl's true essential nature. The soul knows that. So yes, when you're doing your treatment, you are speaking from your soul you're bringing the truth of your soul into physical expression. So I love the way that you phrased that it is something bigger or deeper that is speaking or that you're hearing when you are doing a mental treatment. That's exactly what's happening. Your soul is bigger than the physical form of your body. And when you know that, you will experience that feeling that you described. So thanks, Carl, for that. And we are out of time for this week's Sunday morning Science of Mind class at CSLDallas. Be with us next week at 9:15 a.m. Central Time. And send your friends to the recording on Facebook Live throughout this week if there's anything that came up today that you think will be helpful for them. Join us at 10:30 a.m. Central Time for our Sunday celebration. Reverend Karen Fry and I will be talking about from Namaste to Ubuntu and kicking off this month's new theme. Have a great week, everybody.